you touched on contacting your customers, getting into their mindset, and staying close to them. Like how do you best do that effectively and probably do that at scale? I mean, do people even answer email surveys, or is it a pick up a phone, or pick up a Zoom call? I guess in our current climate, how do you find it's most effective to sort of stay in the same mindset as what your customers are facing?
For me, it's very much about engaging. I mean, it is, and I encourage people. Video calls are here for a reason. All of the stigma of video is gone, as we are all at some level desperate for human interaction. You're trapped in your home. You're trapped in a small, your small bubble. You're encouraged to be socially distant. It's actually misnamed. It should be physically distant. We don't want to. We are social creatures, and so you do want to engage from a social interaction, but you do it in video. Call your customers, pick up, spend some time talking to them, understand their situation, engage, ask questions, and most importantly, listen. There is always that quip of we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should be listening more than you're talking, and hear from your customers what their concerns are. That will sustain well, and it distinctly does scale.
Couldn't agree more. And I feel like the important, external customers, if you own the company, your internal customers as well. I think in a remote climate where we're all working, out of offices, keeping in touch is more important than ever.
And what's interesting is we also have to recognize the fact that time feels different right now. I mean, it's interesting to say, from my perspective, we're roughly, I've been in quarantine lockdown roughly 5 weeks or so. It feels like 5 years. It feels like an interminable amount of time. But if you were to actually say, when you look at it in actual raw calendar time, it's not all that long. It's not that much time. So the intensity of the situation does create a perception of a difference of time. That's okay. You recognize that, but then you realize that, it is okay to move at a slightly different pace right now. We're going to be diligent. We're going to be careful. It isn't as much time as we think it is.
Nice. Okay. Some last non-corona related questions. So you grew your MSP from, a 1-person band through to 15 people with revenues of 1.4 mil USD per annum. And then you sold it off. For our partners out there, as you grew that business, is there anything that you would have done differently?
I would have done so much differently. I would have done so much differently.
Give me top 3, top 5.
Well, my number 1, though, I think is the most important one. I think the one thing that I didn't do well enough, and I look back and I corrected it in later portions of my career, is understanding the value of people. That ultimately, no matter what we talk about from an MSP or a technology perspective, ultimately we really are just services companies. We just happen to deliver services with technology. I would have focused way more on my people. I would have actually more invested in people than even I did. I was moderately successful. I'm proud of what I built, but I look back and I go, there's so many opportunities to do more with people that I think would have paid off even better by investing in people or hiring better people or always upgrading my people in terms of investing in them and training. Like that just felt like an underutilized opportunity. And in hindsight, that's something I would do more of.
I'll take 3. So that's 1. Give me a 2 or 3. Anything that you would have.
It's people, but so that is such an overwhelming portion of it that I think that for me is that. The second is that I actually look and say I probably would have been a little bit more diverse in my offerings. I was very much a pure play managed services provider. Now I actually think, as maturity and time continues on with me, I actually like a mix of managed services, project as a robust business for solution providers. I think that's a little bit more well-rounded. And I think that my third thing would have been is actually been better about externally being focused, not focus so much on my industry and focus a little bit more on my customers' industries, because I think that would have actually made us even better at what we did. So if I had to pick my 2 and 3 behind people, it would be those 2.
So there you have it, top 3 tips. Number 1, internal people, focusing on your internal staff. Number 2, a diversity portfolio of offerings. And number 3, looking at your customers. Again, a people question, looking at your customers and their verticals and what's driving their bottom lines. Great tips. Any tips in terms of leading great teams?
Yeah, my number one thing, and again, this is all based on my own experience on leading teams, both successfully and not successfully. The most successful I've ever been at leading a great team was when I completely viewed my job as getting out of the way and supporting them, being the one that got rid of obstacles for them and focused on empowering them was my most successful team interaction. So the more time I spent on my people and making sure that they were engaged and they had everything they needed, the more successful my team was. So for me, my number one tip really is people, because they are so critical to it. That's culture, that's communication. You cannot do enough there. It is so worth the investment.
Wow, cool. How do you sort of keep across industry trends? How do you keep abreast of what's happening?
I read a lot. I read a lot. I listen to a ton of podcasts, and I make sure that I mix it up, that I'm not only listening to the typical 3 or 4 that I found that I like, is I'll make sure that I consume from even more sources of news, and from different places, so I'll look at in terms of, I'll look at business journalism, and I'll look at tech journalism, and I'll look at channel journalism, and then I'll wander off and I'll see like what is going on in this other interesting area. And if I'm interested in, so for example, I have real interest in privacy, I'll wander off and I'll read about like, well, what are the lawyers talking? What's happening in the legal press around that? So making sure that I spend a portion of my time consuming information and try and keep my sources of information pretty varied. Nice
shots. And your podcasting on Business of Tech podcasts on mspradio.com. Tell us a bit about what that project's about.
Yeah, so I love these kinds of conversations. I love engaging, but one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was how can I help solution providers be smarter about interpreting all of that news that I talk about and giving some of the insights that I did. So I said the best way that I can do it is, I've always been a chatter. I always like talking. I like presenting. And I said, what was the easiest way to do that? You know what? Gift of gab. Get me on a podcast and I'll start doing it. So I do a daily 5-minute podcast called The Business of Tech. And I focus on generally anywhere between 3 and 4 news stories of the day that interest me. And I talk about the story, but I do a segment called Why Do We Care? And it's around my commentary on what it is about that story that is relatable to us as service providers. So is it around, when I see something like, is that of note and why to us? It's available on all the podcatchers. You're looking for The Business of Tech. All of the links to subscribe to everything are at mspradio.com. So you can get that access to that kind of daily insight.
Fantastic. All right, let's wrap up with Famous 5. So at the moment, just you on the podcast creating content for MSP providers. And tell us the IT vendor that you're watching and why.
So the answer is I don't have any one particular one, but I'll tell you things that I'm looking for. What I'm actually really looking for right now is to understand the motivations of the vendors based on their financial investing positions. The difference between a founder-driven one versus an angel investor one versus a private equity invested company versus a publicly traded company. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that, and where my eye is too is I'm looking for new interesting founder-driven companies that are entering into our space. Now, I don't have one that in particular that I'm interested in.
No insider tips.
No, not right now, but that's the framework that I'm using to analyze them. I also use I call it my 3 L's. I look for companies that fit into one of 3 categories. Either I consider them leaders, I consider them laggard, meaning not the negative sense, but just that they're in the pack being they are following. And my third L is lost their mind, where I think they've lost the track a little bit. And some of the content that I've been producing is about thinking about companies from those perspectives. It's okay not to be a leader. Sometimes you have to be a follower.
And do you actually follow the activity of all three categories?
I do. I'm looking for companies. I like to highlight companies that I consider leaders that have moved in really interesting ways. So, for example, Microsoft is very much a leader right now. When you think about their response to the pandemic, they've been really, really proactive about communicating with their customers. They're making bold statements. They're doing all virtual events to 2021.
Why do you follow laggards and companies that's lost their ways? Surely you wouldn't want to.
Well, true, but you want to learn the lessons of how they've stumbled. Laggards and I mean laggards from the perspective of they just simply are following. They're middle of the pack. In order to be a leader, you have to have followers. Yep. It's okay to be a leader. So a laggard in my mind is not a bad thing. They've just fallen into line with the norms of the industry. The ones that I'm looking to that have lost their mind are the ones that I'm trying to analyze and say, you know what, I want to understand where they lost the script so that I can advise people to not do those things. So that's where my head goes from that perspective.
A bit like learning history in American classrooms. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. That's the thing.
Cool. And favorite business book or podcast? The answer for this one might be obvious.
No, I'm not gonna. You don't pimp yourself. That's not so good. So I'll point people at a podcast that I really enjoy called Pivot. It's hosted by Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. Kara Swisher's a journalist who's been covering Silicon Valley for a long time. Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU Stern of marketing, and they break down tech and government in some really interesting ways. Of course, they're Americans, so they're focused from that perspective. But I love their insight into the way that they think about business, and so I highly recommend it.
Perfect. Thank you. And what did your 20-year-old self, what did you wish your 20-year-old self knew?
So my 20-year-old self would have been a third-year student at university. I think that I would tell myself that to slow down slightly and focus more on people. That again, the idea of any investment that I make in people pays off through that sort of, exponential growth over time. And remember that small investments every single day in people turn into long-term gains over the course of your life.
Fantastic. It feels like it's not just business insights here, it's life lessons overall. Fantastic. All right, let's go with the vendor joke closer. Let's hear it.
So, 2 peanuts walk down an alley. One was assaulted.
Clearly, Pinocchio is the winner. Audience, Pinocchio is the clear winner.
There you go. But I've always loved that joke.
Business and life lessons from Dave Sobel at Business of Tech podcast. Tune into his podcast to hear more valuable insights. I think there is lots of gold in today's show. Please comment, let us know which is the winner. Like or subscribe. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Dave, for late evening in DC.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Thank you.